Hello everyone, I'm Jeremy Hollman and I'm mad about rock art, and I'm going to give you a talk about rock art traditions in South Africa. So most of us, when we think of rock art in South Africa, we think of the beautiful brush painted images of humans and animals that were made by hunter-gatherer people and who we call the Bushmen or the San. But in fact, there are a number of other rock art traditions in the country. And in this talk, I'm going to briefly take you through some of these and show you what they look like and where you can find them. Let's start quickly just by clarifying the term art. In this talk, I'm going to use the word art, but not in the sense of the production of art objects made by so-called artists for exhibition or for sale. Rather, what I'm meaning is image and image maker. But because we are so used to these words art and artist, we're just going to use them here. I just want to point out that there is a cultural difference. The traditions can be divided up into 5. Hunter-gatherer, Bushman rock art, painted and engraved. Then something called raider art, which is made by people called the Amatola in the Maluti Drakensberg. Then we have geometric, so-called geometric rock art, also painted and engraved, and thought to have been made by Khoi pastoralists. Then we have the art of Bantu-speaking farmers, and then we also have an art of European settlers, but I'm not going to discuss that here. So we can distinguish traditions by 3 criteria. What the art comprises, in other words, the subject matter. Is it animals? Is it geometric or schematic shapes? The location, where do we find the art tradition? Geographically and in the landscape. And then thirdly, the style or the manner of depiction. Is it brush painted naturalistic motifs? Are they finger painted? What kind of materials were used? Different kinds of ochres, different ways of preparing the ochres, and other materials used such as charcoal and white clay. Here are 4 images just to give you an idea of how the different traditions look. I said before that some of the traditions span both painting and engraving. So here I've included an engraving of a hunter-gatherer animal, an eland, which is typical subject matter. The geometric or the schematic carvings, beautiful design cut out on the rock there. Then the paintings, in this case of the Bantu-speaking farmers at the bottom left, and then at bottom right you can see raider art, and if you look you can see a figure on a black horse, and then below it are other figures on horseback, and then eland being hunted. So this is Cecil van Riet's Louw's map of the distribution mostly of hunter-gatherer rock art across South Africa and partially into Namibia on the left there. And you can see first of all that the coverage is pretty much the whole country. You find rock paintings and rock engravings everywhere. The paintings are the blue dots, and they are confined to the mountainous areas where paintings are made on boulders and overhangs. And then in the interior of the country, the red dots represent engravings, and those are found on the plateaus and on rock outcrops largely of dolerite, but it can also be diabase and other substrates. And you can see also in terms of numbers, at least in terms of the recorded numbers, that there are many more painting sites than engraving sites. So our understanding of the hunter-gatherer engravings and paintings is that a form of shamanism is at the core or underlies the interpretation and understanding of paintings and engravings. So it's to do with working with a power or an energy that has different names in different hunter-gatherer cultures. Can be called Mum or Gri, and this is to do with intervening in the world, using this power or energy, either that you have in your own body or that other animals have, such as all the great meat animals, like this elephant we see here. And this power is used in various ways for rainmaking, for healing, and for use in hunting to control and modify behaviors. So in this case we have an elephant, which is considered to be a very powerful animal, and around it we have a group of figures who are in various dance postures, and we think that this is an indication of the power of the elephant, and the people dancing around it are getting that power of the elephant in the performance of their dance. And as you probably know, the most frequently painted animal in the hunter-gatherer rock art is the eland, which is the largest of the antelope and is contains a lot of fat, is a resource that gets shared by people. No one can eat an eland on their own, so it's an occasion for song and dance and for communities to get together. But the eland also has its origins created by God, and for that reason is also a very special animal. Another aspect of the hunter-gatherer tradition that we see more commonly and more clearly in the paintings is dance. And it's interesting the significance of dance that we need to appreciate. As this quote says, dancing is like prayer. And this is what someone explained to a white person, that dances were to the Bushmen what prayer is to white people. So this is not idle recreation dancing. This is dancing with a serious purpose to achieve certain ends. And a great example of that is the well-known medicine or trance dance, where people dance around until they fall down, and then they go on out-of-body travel, and they are able to heal people. But in the past, there were probably a lot more other kinds of dances that people also used for purposes to achieve certain goals. Here's an example of a very vigorous dance scene, painting of a dance scene. We've got figures bending forward, their arms behind their back, their arms spread out on either side, dancing with bending forward and with sticks in their hands, and very well decorated in white. They've got what are probably dance rattles around their legs, and then arm decorations around their arms and their waist. This is a relatively more recent painting, because we can see that there are fat-tailed sheep painted here. And the current dates we have for the arrival of sheep in South Africa are around about 2000 BP. So the age of this painting can't really be older than that. And what's interesting about this is that you can see very clearly the difference between male figures, which are these rows of people dancing here. Their bodies are long and thin. And then the females, who are here at the right-hand side, with very fat thighs and buttocks. And we see the same thing depicted here. And we know from the Kalahari ethnography, we know that there's a division of labor in the dances, sometimes at any rate, where the women will sit on one side and provide clapping support in the form of medicine songs, or in the case of other dances, there will be other songs and rhythms that get clapped. And this is something that we're seeing depicted here in this painting. This is another interesting one from the Western Cape, where we have a row of what are probably finger dots, and then above it we have here a fat woman, and she's painted right next to fat-tailed sheep. And possibly some of the symbolism around this might be comparing the fatness of the woman to the fatness of the sheep. And in hunter-gatherer cultures, fat is a very important item in terms of nutrition, but also in terms of its significance and its associations. It's associated with plenty, with feeling good, with feeling full, with fertility, and a whole lot of other positive associations. So one of the things that we can see in this collection of paintings here is a connection that the artists are drawing between the fatness of a woman and the fatness of the sheep. But elsewhere, the symbolism and the detail of the imagery is much greater. For example, in these paintings, we see figures that have human and animal qualities. This figure is standing like a human. It's got human legs, but it's got hooves, and it's got an animal head, and yet it's carrying human equipment. And then this is its leather cloak or kaross that it's wearing, and attached to the kaross here are 4 fish. So this is speaking to beliefs about things that we may know about in the spirit world, but we do not see unless we are a ritual specialist who's learned how to do these things. The other interesting thing to point out are these really transformed figures with their arms behind their backs and their knees bent. And these are probably also figures that are to do with the spirit world. These are paintings from the Daureb or Brandberg in Namibia, and we have 3 figures that are also very delicately and detailed painted, and they are walking towards the neck and head of a giraffe with their hands extended. So this is possibly something to do with linking of giraffe to ideas about rain. We know about this because the Kham and the Jutqua speak about animals that rain animals, and these 3 figures are probably approaching the giraffe with a view to getting it to make rain. There is also symbolism in the hunter-gatherer rock art around lions and lionesses, and we look at this painting that is from the Eastern Cape. We can see the lioness here at the left chasing a whole lot of running figures, and above them are yet more figures. And what we see happening here is a kind of a transformation between these more ordinary looking running figures who are already starting to look a bit peculiar. They have lines coming out of their heads, and then above them are a number of figures also with their knees bent and their arms held back, and then with animal heads, and they seem to be flying. So we have the idea of transformation, and this is very, very characteristic of the hunter-gatherer rock art of Southern Africa, and it's what makes it so distinctive from the other rock art traditions that we're going to look at. Here we can show other depictions, this time from the Western Cape, showing transformed figures, probably being shown in the spirit world. We have a highly decorated figure here with a bird's tail, and a human head and holding a stick. And up to the right we have these weirdly shaped figures painted in white, which could be depictions of spirits in the spirit world. And coming back to giraffe and rain again, also from Namibia, where we see a lot of paintings of giraffe, we have here in this picture we have a depiction of a series of forms with lines coming out of them. Here is a detail here which could depict rain, and we have a giraffe standing here with its head raised, and this can be interpreted as a giraffe that is standing and smelling the rain, because we know that many of the animals are able to sniff approaching rain, including the giraffe. It's not only dancing and trancing that we see in the rock paintings, but fairly often we come across instances where fighting is depicted. And this is a classic, very well-known painting from the Western Cape. And as you can see, it shows two groups of people. There's a group out here who have their feet placed on two red lines, and at the right there's an actual step in the rock here, a slight hollow. And what the artists have done is they've created what is probably the outline of a shelter wall, and is showing this group of figures who are inside the overhang. And they've got bows, and they are firing arrows out at these people. There we can see the arrows are white, and they've got the knock of the arrow, where you fit the arrow to the bow in order to shoot it. But there's also something strange going on here. This is not a totally literal depiction of a fight. It's not a snapshot. And because we see this line on which the people are standing is actually coming from this bow. And there are other lines as well that seem to be moving in the direction of the line. So there's something else more than meets the eye going on here to do with the fighting. And then we have quite a regionally specific theme in the rock paintings in the north of South Africa, the Limpopo-Shashe confluence, where we find paintings of what we've identified as aprons, and different kinds of aprons for men and for women. What we're seeing here, these two and this one down here, are probably men's aprons, and they are designed, they're front aprons. So this would cover your genitals, and then this part here would be drawn up behind your legs, through your legs, and then attached to these tie strings. And this would be a typical apron worn by a man. The one up here is much larger and longer and wider. So this is probably made for a woman to wear, and it's probably a back apron that she wears to cover her buttocks. Right, so much for the classical hunter-gatherer rock paintings and engravings. Now we're having a look at the Raider art, or the Amatola art that I mentioned at the beginning, and this is restricted to the Maloti Drakensberg and outlying areas, and it's an art that has quite a narrow window in history, probably from around the early 1820s to around about 1870, so a 50-year period when these paintings were being made. And it's not as well preserved as the hunter-gatherer art. It's made with a different set of pigments. It's made sometimes on different rock surfaces, and it often doesn't preserve as long. And to illustrate this, I'm showing you at the top here, here's a copy made by Patricia Vinicum in the late 1950s of a horse rider carrying a knobkerrie and chasing after an animal. And then this is in 2016 when we visited the rock art site and we did an enhancement of the paintings there. We could still see this figure here, but you can see that the deterioration has been quite considerable. So a lot of this art is fading very quickly. This is to give you an idea of what a rock art site looks like. Here we have a combination of the older hunter-gatherer rock art, and then together with the more recent herder art, which is here, painted here. And this is a close-up of those paintings, and you can see they're still very beautifully painted, very persuasive outlines that show us exactly what we're looking at. Cattle. There you can see horse at the bottom left. And what's also interesting is that the hooves of the cattle are presented in side view. In other words, to show us what the spoor of these animals look like. Here we can see paintings of two people on horseback, probably carrying spears, and they are chasing after an eland, which you can see here has probably got a spear stuck in its back, and that seems to be stumbling. The front legs you can see here are starting to fold in underneath it, and the head and the neck are being held downwards. It's probably going to die very soon. Now we come to the geometric or schematic art, and this again is an art that we find painted and engraved, and we find it across parts of South Africa, the dry parts, and the parts that are historically associated with Khoi herders. And here we have an example of some of the symbols or schematic designs that are used in the rock paintings of this kind. I want to point out here a very interesting example of this design in a very dark blue, which is not a pigment that we find in the rock art until very recently, and only very occasionally. And we think that this is an example of a traditional symbol that being made with a more modern material, this blue pigment, which could have come from something called washing blue, which was used in the late 19th century, early 20th century to wash clothes with and to make them bright. We also find complex designs engraved on rock surfaces, and one of the most striking is Driekops Eiland, which is on the banks of the Riet River, and these are glaciated pavements, rock pavements that have been scoured smooth by glaciers, and on which thousands of these designs have been made next to the river. What's especially interesting is that these engravings are covered up. Whenever the river comes down in flood, these engravings are covered by water. And obviously the people who made these engravings knew about this and took that into consideration when they decided to make the engravings on the side of the river. So there is a significance in the engravings being covered by the water. In other words, there's an association between the engravings and the presence of water. And a little bit later, we'll talk about that in more detail. Here we can see another view of some of the variety of symbols on the glaciated pavement at Driekops Eiland. Here is my colleague, Catherine Nomono, who is getting up close and personal with the engravings, lying down next to them in order to see further details. Here we have another example of a very complex and beautifully executed design that's made to cover the entire rock face. And this is from close to Kimberley in the Northern Cape. I've been showing a lot of engravings. Here's a painting of what has been identified as a kind of apron. This is the form of the apron. These are the tie strings, and then these are decorative tassels. So this would have been made to either to cover the front area of a woman's body or the back area. And this is from Limpopo province. Some more quite detailed paintings that we think could also depict aprons. Talking about these two white shapes here and then this white shape here. They're quite schematic, quite difficult to understand what they are unless you have the background information that you can bring to the paintings, and then you can recognize these things as items of clothing. And then I just point out here that they are also painted on the same rock surface, are painted some of the more traditional or more classic hunter-gatherer paintings. The interesting thing about these engravings and paintings of this schematic kind are that they are generally or almost always near water. And this is an example. Here we have water, and then at the back we have a little overhang where there are some paintings. Here you can see in more detail what the overhang looks like. It's not a living space, it's a place away in the shade and a place close to the water. And you can see the two designs that were made inside this overhang. This is an example of a much more complex rock face. It's been painted probably in several different episodes and in different colors, and it's all finger painted, but the finger paintings are different. We have designs here, we have rows of strokes, and then we have strokes, independent strokes in red here. Another example showing another kind of very widespread design that I call the fish skeleton. And then also underneath the rock here is a very complex arrangement in white of rows and little cross sections, and then another symbol in red made on top of it. We at this stage don't know what these symbols mean, but we can recognize them as designs with meaning, which is a start. And currently our thinking on this is that some of these designs were probably linked to girls' puberty rights, and the patterns and shapes and designs of women's objects and bodies that are being made onto the rock, including things like headbands, aprons, bags, and ornaments. These are some pictures taken in the late 1980s by Linda Voltman, showing amongst the Griqua people in Griqua town, showing excerpts from a woman's initiation. First thing that we can see in this picture is the initiate in the center, and then the old ladies, the aunties, the grannies that look after her and that guide her through the whole initiation process. In the middle we can see the group of people. This is now after the girl has been in isolation for a month following her first period. She comes out of isolation and she's been taken down to the river, where she is going to be introduced to the water snake. And the water snake is a being that all Khoi groups speak about. It's a creature that lives in all permanent bodies of water, and as human beings you have to get on the right side of the water snake. You have to link yourself in a positive way to the water snake, and this is one of the first things that gets done after a girl comes out of isolation. And in this picture here at the right, you can see there's the auntie on the right and the initiate here on the left, and if you look carefully you can see splashes of water. And what the auntie's doing is that she's smacking the water and it's splashing up onto the girl, and the auntie is looking at the way that the water is splashing and how it's falling onto the girl, and she's using that as an indication to show whether the water snake has accepted this new woman, whether she's been accepted into the community. These kinds of initiation are still being carried out today. And one of the highlights of the girls coming out after the isolation is that she gets gifts. She gets presents from other members of the community, from her aunties, from her mother, from her family, and often the things she gets are items of clothing and decoration that have been specially made by a family member, and that's made according to plans and designs that belong to the family and that have been handed down over generations. So here we have an engraving of what is probably a headband. If you compare it to what this girl is wearing, and if you look at this one and then at this girl, these could be engravings of headbands that have this significance and power as gifts. Another part of initiation for girls and for men, for young women and men, is marking of the skin, or tattooing. And these can be for various purposes. For girls, it's often to do with luck, with easy childbirth, with fertility, and so on. And this is a Gui girl who's just come out of isolation, and you can see that she's been heavily tattooed here. And it's possible that some of these sets of parallel scratches that we find on the rocks at some rock art sites may refer to this tattooing. The other item of clothing that is very important around initiation and after initiation are what we could call the tasseled pubic aprons. We see an example here of a Khalahadi girl with one. Here's a sketch, and then here are engravings of what are probably tasseled pubic aprons. And this again would be celebrating the idea of initiation and transition from girlhood to womanhood. This could be a back apron. If you compare it to the sketch here, there are the tie strings, and there's a nice full apron that will cover the buttocks. And then some of these designs that we call geometric are probably better known as schematic, and you can see that we see a lot of these designs on decoration of objects. In this case it's bags, different kinds of bags, and we see similar things depicted in the rock art sometimes, which gives us the idea that things that they're making on the bags and probably on ostrich eggshells and other items are also being made on the rock. Right, moving on to Bantu farmer art. This is made by groups of Bantu-speaking people entering Southern Africa from Eastern Central Africa from around 2,000 years ago. We will also have a look at Northern Sotho initiation and so-called protest rock art, as well as settlement designs in Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal. And I'll just mention there's also Southern Sotho boys initiation art, but I'm not going to illustrate that now. So the boys initiation art amongst the Northern Sotho, this is in Limpopo province, and a plateau called the Machabeng Plateau. And we can see a typical location of where this rock art would be. These are nominally secret places where the boys will go, and they will be out for at least a month, living under conditions of hardship and stress, probably suffering lack of food, and every day performing dances. And during this time, or after this time, we're not sure of the details, the rock art is made. And this is what it looks like. It's finger painted using white clay, and you can see straight away that it's very distinctive, and it's clearly recognizable as something different. And what we see in this painting are paintings, what we see in this picture, are paintings of male symbols, more particularly elephant and giraffe. These are associated with men and have various meanings, a lot of which we as outsiders are not going to know about, because this is special knowledge that is not shared with outsiders. Another symbol is a crocodile-like creature that is known as Homa, and these are manifestations of the ancestral spirits. And both men and women have Homa. these in this case are probably men's choma. But the initiation art isn't a static thing. It changes as tradition changes and as a result of history and social change. So here we have finger paintings of a wagon with what might be a settler and mules or horses that are pulling the wagon. And this probably also has a significance in terms of initiation. And a possible hint of what the symbolism may be, we will see in the next slide. I beg your pardon, it's not the slide, it's the next slide. Just an interesting set of images here to show fighting between groups of people. Whether this is part of the initiation process, I don't know. And as I say, a lot of the information is restricted to the participants. This is a very interesting set of images here, also from the Machabeng, and which is reproduced in the Origin Center Museum. And it's a set of railway tracks, which they're three at the left, and then they join into one. And then at the right, along the railway track, are a number of railway coaches, and then at the front is a steam engine with smoke coming out of it. And then below it, we can see some of the traditional male initiation animals. They're giraffe. And this has been interpreted in various ways. The one is as a form of what Ben Smith has called protest art. And according to this interpretation, the train is seen as a kind of a monster based on a traditional belief about a being called Koro Malilo, and that is a monster that snatches people and takes them away. So, according to Ben Smith's interpretation, the train is seen as a kind of a monster that comes up to this part of Limpopo province and snatches away the young men and takes them to the mines. So that is as part of the migrant labor system. A slightly different interpretation is that comes from the idea that for young men, Northern Sotho men, going to the mines was actually a part of initiation process, and that a young man would go to the mines and there would be part of the process of achieving manhood, and he would return from the mine with gifts and hopefully a firearm. This is a photograph to show you how the images were traced using a clear plastic, and the person doing the tracing is one of Chief Malabogo's descendants. We're still in the Machabeng in Limpopo province, and we're looking here at paintings of what we think are women's art. And I can point out that some of these spread-eagled figures are probably what we spoke about earlier, choma, and in this case, women's choma. And now we move away from Limpopo and come back down to KwaZulu-Natal, where we look at engravings of what appear to be settlement patterns. So this is an aerial view of settlements, Nguni-speaking settlements, seen from the air, and you can notice that at the center of each of the settlements is the kraal, the big circular area in the middle, and then around the kraal are the homesteads, and at the back of the homesteads, which we can't see in this picture, are the grain bins. And outside of the settlement we have the fields. And this is very much like what we see on these sandstone pavements, which are next to the road that goes through Muden in KwaZulu-Natal. We've scraped away the earth, the sand that was covering it, and we've exposed the engravings underneath. And here we can see very clearly that circular area in the middle, which is the cattle kraal, and then the large dots around the cattle kraal would represent the homesteads, and then behind the homesteads we find another series of dots which are the grain bins. And then at the right you can see the entrance to the settlement and the entrance going into the cattle kraal. Then to the northeast of KwaZulu-Natal, in Mpumalanga, there is the very well-known site of Boomplaas, which has just been declared a national monument, national heritage site, And again, we have the arrangement on the rock of these settlement patterns. Again, you see the circles within the circles. This is a close-up of what I showed you previously. The rock is wet, it's been raining, and you can see in the middle the cattle kraal and then the other settlements. What's really interesting about this site is how the boulders, which are large, these 2 or 3 meters long and maybe 1.5 meters wide, and they've used the entire rock to create a cluster of settlements. Here you can see the settlements dotted all over the place, and they're connected by lines, and these are probably the tracks that people and cattle would have followed. And then also seem to have incorporated these natural hollows in the rock, and these represent pools of water. So it is a 3-dimensional sculpture, really, of a settlement. So on that note, I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that this has opened your eyes a bit to the great variety of rock art traditions that we have in South Africa, and more widely in the Southern African subcontinent. And that you can see that there are actually many opportunities available for research. If you're not interested in the hunter-gatherer research, you think it's been overdone, or it doesn't attract your interest, there are many other research questions with these other research traditions that you can still follow up. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done. Thank you very much, and I hope to meet some of you in person over the years to come.